Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, here to help you fall asleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so feel free to leave a comment. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. Get all started. I've always been an outsider. Throughout my school years, I never quite fit into the system. I wasn't exactly among the most bullied losers, but I mostly kept to myself. Even in elementary school and the early years of middle school, a few classmates repeatedly tried to provoke me. One time, 2 boys dared me to act. On the first occasion, I didn't back down. On the second, I struck one of them in the throat. It wasn't a particularly vicious blow, but it was enough to subconsciously signal that I was an easier target. In this way, I came off as a tough guy, though, in truth, I was an introverted, thoughtful person with a polite heart. I spent most of my school days alone until I finally made real friends in the 7th grade. During our second period, math class, I finished my work so quickly that I had the rest of the time to read or sketch. That day, I was doodling a picture of Hellboy on a scrap of paper. I'd just watched the Guillermo del Toro film when the principal walked in, accompanied by a girl. "Hello, everyone. This is Elisa. She's joining your class from now on. Please be kind to her," he announced. With a stern look and a hint of irony, he added a few details about where she was from, confidently assuring us that she'd settle in just fine. Elisa already towered over most of us, with long, black, curly hair that looked a little dry and shadows under her eyes, as if sleep deprivation were taking its toll. She also bore the scar from a corrected cleft lip. Some of the girls exchanged disdainful glances, as if to say, "She's gross, and by keeping my distance I can prove I'm normal." Elisa seemed to notice, yet she displayed neither embarrassment nor sorrow, only a quiet, resigned weariness. Our eyes met briefly, without any cheesy blush or sparks of romance, and then I looked away, returning to my drawing. After the teacher finished his lecture, he left the room but paused in the doorway. "Sit wherever you'd like," he called out. Elisa walked directly over and sat next to me. Moments later, the teacher reappeared, handed her the worksheet we'd been working on, and said, "Help her if she falls behind, okay?" "No problem," I replied. It turned out Elisa wasn't behind at all. She explained that her old school had given much tougher assignments, and by 6th grade she'd already covered similar topics. She completed the elementary geometry worksheet in just a few minutes before turning back to me. "Is that Hellboy?" she asked. "Yeah, I saw the movie with my mom last night. Cool. My dad took me to see it a few days ago. Did you like it?" "I did, but somehow I found it a bit gross." I laughed and said, "Exactly. But that's what makes it so interesting for some people." For the rest of the class, we talked about movies, bands, food, and everything in between. Our shared love for heavy metal and offbeat films quickly bonded us. Of course, there were many more experiences over the following school years, stories I could tell. But this isn't a romance. Elisa and I remained friends. Although there were moments hinting at something deeper, in the end, it was only friendship. In addition to movies and music, Elisa and I discovered our passion for reading. I was a huge fan of fantasy, and for exploring the world around us. At first, it was just simple walks through the woods surrounding our small Midwestern town of Oak Grove, Indiana. But by the beginning of high school, we'd graduated to exploring abandoned buildings in the area. Oak Grove didn't offer much in the way of entertainment, aside from bowling, playing video games at home, or aimlessly wandering around. So, it became increasingly popular among local teenagers to explore deserted places. We even heard rumors. Some of us would pore over the obituaries in the local newspaper for hints of which houses were empty. A few kids even broke into supposedly untouched properties to loot them. Elisa and I, however, stuck to officially abandoned structures. We began with rundown spots, old farms and barns over 50 years old, and soon moved on to more interesting locations. We explored an abandoned chapel with a mysterious basement, an old paper mill, 2 shuttered diners, and various vacant houses. We even couldn't resist checking out a notorious mobile home where a woman had been murdered by drug-addicted attackers. We snapped countless Polaroid photos and filmed B-roll footage that looked straight out of a horror movie. But there was one place that wasn't officially off-limits. A derelict, office-like building that we'd once snuck into and had soon nicknamed Tartarus, even though it never had an official name. The local police would always warn us in ominous tones, "Stay away from the property a few miles behind the old chapel, got it?" That cryptic admonition quickly gave the building an eerie reputation, especially among teenagers like us. One of my friends, Larry, once told us that he'd gone inside. He said he'd taken just one step into the building, heard strange noises, and then immediately ran out. "Something's not right in there, man," he warned. Although Larry had always been a laid-back guy, his description kept us at a safe distance for a while. Near the end of our school years, Elisa and I decided we didn't want to go off to college. We didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on an education that didn't guarantee a fulfilling career. Instead, we both chose to pursue vocational training at a local trade school, a decision our parents supported, assuring us they'd help as long as we worked hard. And with our 18th birthdays fast approaching, we knew we wouldn't have the same leeway with the authorities much longer. In that context, Elisa suggested one last exploration of Tartarus. I remember a conversation in the school cafeteria, in a secluded corner where small groups like ours gathered. At one end of the table sat the so-called hackers, teenagers who prided themselves on their technical know-how, and at the other, the group mockingly dubbed the landlubbers. Elisa, now even taller and still sporting a slightly faded but unmistakable scar on her lip, looked tired but remained optimistic. "I don't know, Elisa. We've gotten our fill of urban exploration thrills. Maybe we should just leave it alone or only visit the old spots one more time." "Yeah, you're probably right, but it sounds so tempting. What if we just stroll into the lobby like Larry did? And if something feels off, we bail immediately." After some back and forth, we agreed. "All right, if we both bring our knife and your pepper spray, I'm in. But seriously, if anything seems strange, we get out. Got it?" "Sure, no problem." So, we set off in my beat-up pickup truck, which was parked only about half a mile from Tartarus. The walk to the building was uneventful at first, but we soon noticed, just as we had the first time we'd entered, that no birds or animals were making a sound. It was only a few hours past noon, so I tried to convince Elisa. "Maybe there's a wolf marking its territory nearby. It's probably normal, right? We'll just take a quick look at the lobby. Come on, let's go." Suddenly, we emerged from the dense woods into an oval clearing, and at its far edge stood the unassuming office building. In front of the entrance, tall, overgrown grass swayed in the breeze. No doubt the local code enforcement had mowed it from time to time. We approached the building, and when I turned the door handle, it swung open easily. It wasn't locked. Inside, a dusty reception area unfolded before us. A large wooden counter, old moldy padded chairs, and in one corner, a dead rat lay forgotten. As mundane as it seemed, I immediately felt what Larry had warned us about. No sooner had I stepped inside than my field of vision began to narrow, and a suffocating silence fell over everything. On top of that, a strange, almost indescribable odor rose up, a foreign, deeply unpleasant smell. Then Elisa broke the silence. I get what Larry was talking about. Yeah, I know, I replied. We walked cautiously through the reception area when Elisa suddenly said, "It feels weird in here, but I still want to take a closer look." "There's nothing special here. It's just another dusty room," I began, but she wouldn't be dissuaded. "Exactly, because it's nothing special. Let's just go upstairs, take a quick look around, and then get out." "No, Elisa. I really think we should leave," I protested. But Elisa ignored my objection. She turned down the corridor behind the counter and called, "I'm out." "Good luck." Normally, I would have left her to her own devices, but this time I wasn't about to let her explore alone. I made a bit of noise in one of the adjacent rooms to give the impression that I was leaving the building, then headed back to the front door to test it again. But the door wouldn't open. Peeking through the narrow gap between the double doors, I noticed faint sunlight streaming in. And in that sliver of light, I saw that something solid was wedged against or between the handles. It wasn't there before. A wave of panic washed over me, yet I forced myself to remain calm. In dangerous situations like this, you have to keep a cool head. I quickly moved to the window next to the entrance. When it wouldn't budge, I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the glass. The plexiglass was sturdy and barely moved. Then I turned and followed the corridor Elisa had taken. We'd been in similar situations before, like that time in the remote part of the old chapel, from which escape seemed nearly impossible, or when we once encountered a homeless junkie on one of our explorations. Those experiences taught me one thing: never freeze up. You must always keep moving, no matter how paralyzing the stress. Perhaps I looked a bit odd, or even frightening, as I walked down the hall with an expressionless face and eyes wide open. Elisa was nowhere to be seen, neither on the ground floor nor in the small side rooms off the staircase. I wanted to call out to her, but fear rendered me mute. Then I heard her voice. "John?" There was unmistakable terror in her tone. I rushed up the stairs and entered the break room where she was. There she stood, framed in the doorway. The moment I peered into the room, my anxiety doubled. On the floor was a ritualistically drawn circle. The window in the room was shattered, too narrow to climb through, but it was still made of plexiglass, letting in a cool breeze. The circle, traced in salt, slowly distorted in the wind. In its center was an eye, surrounded by strange lines reminiscent of tentacles, or even childish sun motifs. Countless candles were arranged around the circle. I lost count, but it must have been hundreds, all of which appeared to have been lit at noon and only finished by around 6:15 p.m. I stood behind Elisa, peeking over her shoulder, when out of the corner of my eye I noticed a movement. I turned, and for a brief moment I saw someone, or something, staring down the corridor from one of the adjacent offices. It looked human, yet the figure wore a tight-fitting mask with mere eye holes, fashioned from assorted animal furs. Behind the mask, empty, dead blue eyes locked onto mine before disappearing into the shadows of the doorway. Desperation set in as I searched for further signs of danger. My panic churned in my stomach, and the strange odor grew even more intense. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" Elisa replied. "There was someone walking down the hall." Elisa hesitated, then left the doorway and headed for the stairs, suddenly grabbing my arm to pull me along. I pulled back. The front door is locked and the windows won't break. Already on edge, Elisa now seemed completely frozen. What were we supposed to do? There was no way out. We hadn't brought our cell phones, and something was terribly wrong. The only thought in my mind was, we have to find whoever trapped us in here. Whoever put us in, they must be able to let us out. "Do you still have your pepper spray?" I asked. "Yeah." "Get it out. I've got my knife. We can do this. Whoever locked us in here has to let us go. We have to confront them now. Though we both trembled with fear, Elisa knew I was right. Together, we headed down the dark corridor toward a side area where I had earlier glimpsed a figure. But as we approached, we realized it wasn't a room at all. It was another staircase. After a brief hesitation, we descended. I'd estimate that we went down 3 more levels below the ground floor. On each level were additional rooms, though their doors had all collapsed into rubble. That lowest level made the name Tartarus feel more than fitting. The atmosphere grew oppressively thick. My vision became even more distorted and took on a reddish tint, and the stench, oh my God, the stench, became so overpowering that it defied description, utterly foreign and nauseating. This level revealed a long corridor lined with small side rooms. Unlike the upper floors, which were lit by daylight, here the harsh hum of fluorescent lights dominated. At the far end of the hall, we discovered an office with frosted glass doors. As soon as we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us. We had hardly any choice. I briefly considered retracing my steps to try breaking the plexiglass, but this corridor appeared to be a faster, more direct route. So we pressed on. Most of the side rooms turned out to be old server rooms filled with dusty metal cabinets containing outdated computers, archaic even after 2004, while others were just pitch-black voids that seemed to stretch on forever. About halfway down the hall, a door suddenly slammed shut, and the dull clanging of metal echoed painfully loudly through the corridor and into the adjacent dark rooms, far louder than I liked. When I heard the soft click of a lock, I saw no other option but to keep moving toward the office. No sooner had I reached the door, just a few inches from the knob, than my vision distorted as if a red-tinted magnifying filter had been thrown over it. The stench was so overwhelming that I could barely stand, and a wavering tone buzzed in my ears. "Don't do it, John," Elisa whispered almost inaudibly. But it was too late. I was standing there, feeling almost compelled to open the door. Perhaps I would regret it later, but in that moment the urge was irresistible. The door led into a rusty, empty room. The floor was either bare concrete or caked with grime. At the far end of the room was a strange metal hatch, a trapdoor of sorts, with a loosely hanging chain attached. In the far left corner, a ladder led to another hatch, and as I climbed, I suddenly caught sight of a man's legs at the top. "Hey!" I shouted, racing forward to climb up and grab him. But as I was about halfway up, and Elisa managed to follow just enough to slip out of the doorway, the legs swiftly retreated back into the closing hatch, and the office door banged shut behind us. I can hardly put into words how I felt. I could describe how I froze, how my dry throat trembled, but nothing would capture the pure terror I experienced. I never heard Elisa comment on her state of mind at that moment. We were trapped, and behind the frosted glass windows, countless figures gathered in various shapes and sizes. Most appeared human, yet some deviated completely, not only missing limbs but even headless, with impossibly twisted spines or grotesquely exaggerated features. But all that is now secondary. The chain began to slowly lift. I glanced over at Elisa. Stress had etched at least 10 years off her face. She was crying. Wrinkles more befitting a 90-year-old creased her skin, and she was hyperventilating. I rushed to comfort her when suddenly the chain tightened and the metal hatch began to lift. The stench intensified again, and from the hatch came a dreadful sound, a moan like no living creature should make, an unholy blend of a goat's bleat, an alligator's growl, and a cat's cry, mixed with distorted, feeble screams of multiple people. When the hatch opened about halfway, I saw something emerging from the darkness. Imagine a large, ominous eye, set in fleshy, sickly green tissue, like nothing any animal should possess. Surrounding that eye, the rest of the creature's body was composed of human heads with distorted expressions. Some weeping, others screaming. A few seemed to warn us, others begged for help, but most appeared incapable of speech. I'm sorry. I don't want to go into further detail. It was already too much. The creature advanced on us, moving faster than should be possible without legs. When it was only a few feet away, we both panicked. I bolted to the left while Elisa charged to the right, the only difference in our escape. Somehow, it chose her, and she found herself cornered. In a panicked voice, she screamed, "John, help me!" Oh my God! The hatch was still open. I heard her scream as the monstrous thing finally seized her, and I ran down the dark tunnel from which it had emerged. Elisa's screams echoed endlessly, begging me not to leave her, but I kept running. Her cries reverberated so long that it felt as if I'd been trapped in that cavernous passage for hours. Everything blurred into a feverish nightmare. I heard strange sounds all around me. Over and over I stepped on something soft and wet that moaned much like the creature itself. The tunnel was narrow, and thank goodness it was completely dark so I couldn't see my surroundings or my path. I ran, my hand pressed against the wall for guidance, stumbling over clumps of unfamiliar flesh and rocks, until finally I saw daylight. I emerged at the end of the tunnel and stood in its wide opening. There, I discovered a weathered stone altar adorned with symbols reminiscent of the monstrous creature and that eerie circle from earlier. On a relief, the naked eye was depicted, encircled by flames that seemed to threaten a menacing strike from the sky. And elsewhere, the same eye appeared, surrounded by countless heads, as if a portal were forming, from which winged eyes and small, headless, cat-like figures emerged. Behind it all loomed something massive, and a skeletal, seven-fingered hand reached out from that unholy portal. Now that I think about it, it was still daylight outside, so I couldn't have been down in that tunnel for very long. Everything blurred together like a bizarre dream. The small hill where the tunnel emerged, the distant road I later saw, and then the encounter with the police, who found a frightened, disheveled teenager on the roadside. In the face of what I'd experienced, all of that now seems like a barely remembered aside. I wish I could tell you of some sort of closure or redemption from that horror, but there is none. I filed a police report and recounted every detail, and instead of dismissing me, they lied, fully aware that I knew something was amiss. One day, officers came to my house, spoke privately with my parents, and then sat me down, soberly telling me that while exploring Tartarus, Elisa had fallen through a collapsing floor and died. When I protested, they simply stood up and left without another word. My parents insisted I accept it, yet they never revealed what the officers had told them. And to this day, I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to ask. I haven't heard from Elisa's parents since. They didn't even give her a proper funeral. Every day I think about her. I pray that she's gone, or that it was all just a hallucination. But deep down, I fear she might still be down there, trapped with the others who continuously scream and cry. I'm sorry, Elisa, but I won't go back. I won't join you. I'll never set foot in an abandoned building again. Forgive me. Maybe you've seen my name and my face in the news. Perhaps you've heard that I disappeared, that my car was found abandoned on a quiet side street in the so-called Linden Grove neighborhood of Baltimore, and that since then no one has heard from me. The police may have tried to trace my cell phone, but I doubt they uncovered any useful clues. I don't know where I am right now, but one thing is certain. I am far beyond the reach of state authorities. I've been an urban explorer for many years, a person driven to seek out abandoned, mysterious places. There is something undeniably fascinating about stepping into spaces that have lain untouched for decades, where time itself seems to have stood still. Yet, the longer I lingered in these forgotten corners, the more I sensed a subtle, unsettling dissonance, as if the very walls harbored secrets best left undiscovered. Over the years, I roamed through deserted sanitariums, crumbling hospitals, empty schools, and even abandoned factories on the fringes of American cities. I normally steered clear of residential houses. The risk of being spotted by watchful neighbors and reported to the authorities was simply too high. But when a friend, a collector of old blueprints, told me about a mysterious house on Linden Street, I couldn't resist the temptation. The building was a peculiar sight. It looked like a relic from a long-forgotten era, with Gothic elements reminiscent of the grand mansions of the late 19th century, or perhaps of secret constructions from the Prohibition era. Despite the obvious wear on its facade, it exuded a strange, almost majestic aura. Every window was nailed shut, the once lush garden lay barren, and on one massive wall hung a faded sign reading, "Foreclosure Sale." Yet the strangest detail was this. In the official archives, on digital maps, and even in municipal records, this house, until yesterday, had not existed at all. When I scoured the internet for any trace of its history, it was as if the building had been wiped clean from every official database. There were no records to indicate that any structure had ever stood at that address. It was as though it had materialized out of thin air overnight, as if it had defied the very laws of space and time. It seemed as if it had always been there, regardless of logic. At first, I hesitated to step inside this seemingly impossible edifice. Nestled in a quiet residential neighborhood, its very existence felt like a glitch in reality. Could it be that a vast cover-up was at work? In my mind, I entertained the wild notion that beneath the house there might lie a secret Cold War-era experimental chamber, or even a hidden apparatus of an intelligence agency, something that had been expunged from every record. Yet, the burning urge to unravel its mystery overpowered my caution. I knew I had to enter, to confront the question head-on. Otherwise, the uncertainty would haunt me for the rest of my life. On that fateful evening, as the Baltimore sky faded into a dim twilight, I gathered my gear: a sturdy flashlight, extra batteries, a water bottle, my trusty pepper spray, a cell phone, and a well-stocked first aid kit. Nightfall was the perfect cover. The streets were quieter in the dark, and any potential witnesses would likely be fast asleep. When I finally arrived at Linden Grove, an eerie sensation washed over me, as if I were standing at the threshold of another dimension. It felt as if an invisible force was gently restraining me, like being repelled by an unseen magnet, a silent warning that I was about to cross into something extraordinary. I chided myself, dismissing the prickling unease as mere nerves, and cautiously approached the massive front door. I had expected the door to be bolted tight, forcing me to search for a back entrance or a narrow window. To my surprise, however, the door swung open with nothing more than a slight push, all without me having to touch the creaking knob. On closer inspection, I realized that the knob wasn't mechanical at all. It was merely a decorative piece of wood, painted in a shimmering, a metallic gold hue, serving solely to keep the door shut by friction. With my flashlight beaming ahead, I stepped into the foyer. Instead of the musty odor of decay and dampness I anticipated, I was greeted by a fresh, almost unnaturally clean scent, reminiscent of a brand new car. The walls were adorned with intricately carved wood panels, and the polished oak floor gleamed as though it had just been installed. A wide staircase led to the second floor, and several doors opened into additional rooms. It was as if the interior of the house had been preserved in immaculate condition, a baffling contradiction to the decrepit exterior, I decided to explore the ground floor first, and I chose one of the doors at random. Like the front door, this one lacked any mechanical lock. A light push was enough to release it into an adjoining space. The room I entered was an opulent dining hall. Around a long wooden table were elegant chairs with ornate carvings that immediately caught the eye. On the back wall hung a painting that curiously depicted the very house I had just entered, albeit in a less deteriorated, almost idealized state. It was as if someone had attempted to capture the perfect image of the house, a homage to times long past. Among Baltimore's affluent circles, such eccentric tastes were not unheard of, yet this detail only deepened my doubts about the place's authenticity. My attention was drawn to one particularly exquisitely crafted chair. When I tried to examine it more closely, I found that it wouldn't budge, no matter how much I pulled. Puzzled, I knelt to inspect it further, only to discover that it appeared to be an integral part of the floor, as if it had been hewn from a single block of solid wood. There were no joints, no traces of adhesive or nails that might suggest it had been constructed separately. It was as though the chair had grown fused with the oak, a chilling, almost living detail in this surreal environment. A wave of revulsion and dread surged through me. This house felt fundamentally wrong. Its very nature seemed to defy the laws of reality. I wished I had been wiser and left immediately. Yet the burning curiosity and the need to unravel its secret pushed me onward. After leaving the dining hall, I opened another door that led into a library. Towering bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with volumes of every imaginable size and shape. But as I drew nearer, I noticed that all the spines were blank. No titles, no authors, nothing. When I tried to pull one of the books free, it refused to budge. Much like the chairs in the dining hall, everything here seemed inextricably fused with the structure. Who the hell built this place? I muttered softly into the darkness, when suddenly the creaking of old wood echoed behind me. I whipped around, gripping my flashlight tightly, and saw another door slowly swinging open. Bathed in a narrow beam of light, I called out in a trembling voice, "Who's there?" My words vanished into the silence as the door continued to open, as if guided by some unseen force. Instinctively, I reached for my pepper spray, which I always kept within arm's reach, preparing to defend myself. In that very moment, something stepped out of the doorway. A vague, humanoid figure that appeared half-formed and unnervingly artificial, much like a poorly sculpted store mannequin. It seemed to wear a suit, but upon closer inspection I realized that the fabric merged seamlessly with its body. The being had no discernible face, only vague hollows where a nose, mouth, and eyes should have been. A small protrusion served as a makeshift nose, and where a mouth should have been, there was only a shallow crease. Its eye sockets were pale and lifeless, while its head pulsated in a sinister rhythm, as if it were breathing. Its arms, shapeless and bulky, ended in blunt, almost indistinguishable hands. Terror and panic surged through me. With trembling fingers, I aimed my pepper spray at the faceless creature. A dense cloud of searing liquid erupted toward its empty face, yet the entity did not react. It continued its slow, shuffling gait, as if it were still learning how to move, much like a young fawn taking its first steps. In a reflex, I dropped the spray and bolted back into the dining hall. My heart pounded as I reached the corridor leading to the entrance hall, desperate to escape the building. But when I arrived, the massive front door had vanished. In its place stood only a plain wall, upon which yet another painting of the same house was affixed. I tried to grasp the frame and rip it from the wall, but it was as if the painting was an inseparable part of the building, embedded in the walls and indistinguishable from the eerie architecture. Behind me, I heard the slow, relentless sound of footsteps. A frantic thought struck me. Perhaps the faceless creature would struggle with steep stairs. Without a moment's hesitation, I raced up the winding staircase. Step after step, as fast as my exhausted legs would carry me, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached the top, I dared to glance back. To my dismay, I saw the half-formed creature slowly ascending the stairs, pausing briefly on one step, a feeble hint that perhaps it could not overcome the height. But no sooner had it pushed open a door and stepped through than the door creaked ominously closed behind it. A brief sigh of relief made me believe I might be safe for just a moment. Yet, almost immediately, I heard the creak of another door opening directly behind me. I spun around in time to see the faceless entity emerging once again from a doorway. Before, seized by pure panic, I dashed down one of the seemingly endless corridors. As I sprinted through the labyrinthine hallways, more and more details began to reveal themselves. Details that had lain hidden in the shadows of my mind. Identical paintings of the house adorned nearly every wall, each depicting the structure's exterior as if it were the epitome of an idealized facade. Every door I passed was nearly identical in shape and design. Even the tiniest scratches in the wood were perfectly replicated. Here and there lay a rug on the floor, yet it shared the same hard, unyielding quality as the polished oak beneath my feet. Every element screamed that something was profoundly wrong. I rounded another corner and attempted to open one of the identical doors, hoping to find a safe haven. But the door would not budge. Upon closer inspection, I realized that it wasn't a real door at all, but merely a carved recess in the wall giving the illusion of an opening. Cursing and overwhelmed with terror, I pressed on, the sound of shuffling footsteps growing ever nearer behind me. Could it really be catching up so fast? My lungs burned as if I'd been running for hours, and the upper floors unfolded into an endless maze of corridors whose twists and identical doors seemed to shift before my eyes. The very architecture began to crumble. Doors hung askew in the walls, and paintings lay scattered haphazardly across the floor. At one point, I opened a door only to find an exact replica of the library, and there, my faceless pursuer was slowly closing in once more. For a moment, the thought of surrendering without a fight flitted through my mind, but instinct and the will to survive compelled me to slam the door shut and continue my desperate flight. At one point, I made a frantic attempt to escape through what I assumed was a window. A bright, almost blinding light streamed in through a narrow gap, even though it was clearly the middle of the night. But when I crashed into it with my shoulder, I tumbled painfully backward. With trembling hands, I reached for what I thought was glass, only to find it was another wooden panel, glowing with an eerie bioluminescent sheen, reminiscent of the faint shimmer of deep-sea creatures. Just as I felt my strength beginning to give out, I finally discovered a spiral staircase, grand, majestic, yet equally menacing. The steps wound both upward and downward, as if extending infinitely in either direction. But as I drew near, my heart sank. Looking downward, the staircase plunged into what seemed like a bottomless abyss with no visible landings. Looking upward, it stretched endlessly into the night sky. No sooner had I taken in this surreal sight than I heard once again the creak of a door, followed by the shuffling of footsteps. My pursuer was but a few meters behind. Overwhelmed with mounting panic, I pressed myself against the wooden banister as the grotesque, faceless creature inched closer. Its wrinkled, nearly textureless skin resembled an old-fashioned suit clinging to its form, and its head pulsed in a sinister rhythm. With each beat, it came ever nearer, its misshapen, bulky hands reaching out as if to strangle me. When the creature was only inches from my neck, I ducked swiftly, slipped past its disordered form and kicked it forcefully in the back. To my shock, it was heavy, and the force of my kick threw it off balance. It crashed through the banister and tumbled down the endless staircase. Peering over the edge, I watched it fall uncontrollably into the abyss until it vanished from sight. I fervently hoped that this twist of fate would grant me at least a few hours of respite. Exhausted and overcome by an indescribable weariness, I sought refuge in one of the last rooms. A bedroom furnished with an imposing four-poster bed, antique wardrobes, and other period pieces. Yet, even here, the uncanny deception persisted. The bed, as inviting as it appeared, was nothing more than a wooden replica. The pillows and blankets were stiff and cold, as if fashioned from the same material as the rest of the house. My thoughts raced as I struggled to comprehend the night's events. It became increasingly clear that the interior of this house was far larger and more labyrinthine than its unassuming exterior would suggest. The endless staircases leading in every direction and the ever-changing corridors bore witness to something fundamentally amiss. The very floor plan seemed alive, as if it were adapting to the presence of its victims. And I began to wonder, with a growing dread, whether there was any escape at all. Even as I battled exhaustion, I knew that any moment of rest in this place might well be my undoing. Shortly after leaving the room, I felt a crushing pain in my legs, as if the wooden imitation of the bed were slowly coiling around me. With a sudden, desperate tug, I freed myself, drawing a few painful bruises in the process, and resumed my frantic escape. I wandered desperately through endless, shifting corridors, illuminated only by the eerie glow of these non-windows. In a moment of despair, I rifled through my supplies, hoping to find something, a tool, a clue that might help. In my first aid kit, I eventually discovered a pair of sturdy metal scissors, a tool that sparked a desperate idea. Armed with the scissors, I approached one of the glowing wooden panels that served as a makeshift window. Using the tip of the scissors like a chisel, I struck at the radiant surface for several agonizing minutes, until a sizable hole appeared in the wood. When I felt the otherwise unyielding material give way, I pressed the scissors further in and encountered something soft. Horror froze me in place as I watched sticky red liquid seep from the newly created gap. Peering through the slit, I caught a glimpse of pinkish tissue behind what I had assumed was wood. It wasn't wood at all. It was chitin. A chill ran down my spine. I was trapped inside something living, a creature masquerading as part of this hellish edifice. Knowing that any pause might mean succumbing to this ever-hungry labyrinth, I forced myself onward. The half-formed, faceless being no longer appeared. Perhaps it was still tumbling down the endless staircase, unable to find another door through which to follow me. The deeper I ventured into the heart of the house, the more bizarre everything became. Corridors twisted into a maze where horizontal doors and paintings suddenly strewn across the floor were only the beginning of an unimaginable decay. At times, I encountered intersections where 6 different hallways branched off in opposite directions, north, south, east, west, as well as upward and downward. Everywhere I saw identical doors, rugs, and wood panels, as if the entire building were composed of a single, ominous organism. I even tossed a bandage from my first aid kit into the air in a desperate hope that gravity might behave differently in this mad structure. But it fell to the floor, as if it too were part of the unyielding whole. Sometimes, opening a door revealed a strange medley of rooms. A dining hall where a bookshelf lay like a table, a living room whose walls were draped in heavy white fabric, or a bathroom in which, instead of a sink, a small fireplace dominated the space. I passed through more endless staircases, and at one point, As something indistinct brushed past me at a speed that suggested an eternal fall, I instinctively suspected it was the faceless creature, once again caught in a ceaseless plunge. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, I finally discovered a backpack half embedded in the floor. My stomach clenched, my mouth dried up, and the little water I had left was long gone. Every muscle ached, and I felt as if I hadn't slept in days. More than once, the thought crossed my mind to simply stop running and accept my fate, rather than continue fighting through this endless hell. Then, as I rounded yet another corner, I spotted something red, half emerging from the floor. A scrap of fabric slowly being assimilated into the architecture. Without hesitating, I sprinted toward it, wrenched it from the wall with all my strength, and unzipped it in a frantic rush. Inside, I found a sketchbook, a few pencils, some granola bars, and a can of soda. Tears of relief welled up inside me. At least now, I had something to eat and drink. But as I examined the contents more closely, I noticed the outline of a human hand, caught in the same slow process of assimilation from the wooden substrate. Horror gripped me as I realized that another person, another victim of this living nightmare, was gradually merging with the structure. There was no way to free them. Their face was already contorted, as if entirely absorbed by the house. Were they even still alive? After stowing the backpack and its contents, I sat for a moment to study the sketchbook for clues. On the very first page, the date was scrawled, 2022. I had first entered this building back in 2015. I could hardly believe it. Had I really survived in this nightmare for 7 years, while time passed normally outside? I had scarcely slept since that fateful day and had only recently managed to eat something. Yet the longer I remained here, the more a terrifying theory took shape. I had come to understand that this house was a living organism. The blood and flesh hidden behind its wooden facade were undeniable proof, and it clearly operated beyond the known laws of space and time. Inside, it was immeasurably larger, with endless staircases branching out in every direction. I concluded that it must be some extra-dimensional predator, a being that warped the space around it to exist, luring victims into its grasp. It could only imperfectly mimic wood, which is why every element in its interior bore the same wooden texture, albeit in varying shades. I suspected that it lured people inside, dispatched the faceless creature to stalk them, and ultimately absorbed their bodies to feed on them. How such a predator could subsist on occasional urban explorers eluded me, but it was the only explanation that tied together all the mysteries. Moreover, I began to suspect that this building was manipulating not just space but time as well. It was as if the house had vanished shortly after my first visit in 2015, only to reappear in 2022 to ensnare the unfortunate soul whose sketchbook I now held. I had read somewhere that in America, countless missing persons cases remained unsolved. How many of them might have fallen prey to this uncanny predator? Is it limited to appearing in the suburbs, or can it manifest anywhere? A potential hunting ground even in the heart of the Appalachian forests where weary hikers seek refuge in the dark. What prevents it from appearing as an inconspicuous door in a typical single-family home? Is it even bound to our space and time, or does it exist beyond our universe? I will tear these pages from my sketchbook, crumple them into a ball, and hurl them into one of the endless stairwells as soon as I find the next one. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone in the outside world will discover these messages and understand. They must have some method to dispose of their victims, right? My name is Felicity Miller, and in the records of the sketchbook I found the name Ralph Thorne. Remember us, the lost, the victims of a predator that exists beyond space and time.